You might think that your childhood is just something that you long left behind, but what if aspects of it were still present, shaping your daily life? The truth is, childhood traits can continue to have an unconscious influence on your emotional health, even in adulthood. Here's why. As a child, you lack the ability to manage your emotions, communicate with others effectively, and make sensible decisions. However, with time and life experience, you should have improved in these areas. The psychological traits that a child has are extremely beneficial and developmentally appropriate, but only during childhood. They become less helpful or even problematic if these persist into adolescence and adulthood. To be a balanced and mature individual, you need to outgrow the psychological traits you had in childhood. However, this isn't always easy. These psychological traits were, in part, a source of comfort and security, helping you manage things like fear and anxiety. But as an adult, it's important to be able to maintain positive relationships and make wise decisions, and regulate your emotions without depending on coping strategies you had as a child. Let's have a deeper look at some of the behaviors, beliefs, and mindsets that should have evolved into more mature ways of thinking. I'm Daniel, and with over 10 years of experience working in the mental health field and a lifelong student of the unconscious mind, here's a deeper perspective. Imaginary friends. You might wonder who as an adult would still have an imaginary friend. You would be surprised at how this common childhood trait can persist into adulthood in unexpected ways. An imaginary friend is a way that many children express their emotions and exercise their creativity. For a child, this friend they have created can be a refuge from the world, providing comfort and validation. This is a normal and healthy part of their emotional development. It offers an outlet for children to communicate their feelings in a safe, non-judgmental way. Imaginary friends allow children to feel validated and heard when engaging in imaginative play, which ultimately helps them manage and understand their own emotions while exploring the world around them. The child is able to have a sense of control and autonomy. They dictate the rules of play and have a companion who follows their lead. There is no risk of disappointment or rejection when the person you are interacting with was created for you and by you. Most children naturally outgrow this phase and typically form real relationships with people around them. But for many reasons, the essence of this mechanism can persist into adulthood, evolving into behaviors that seek to fulfill similar psychological needs. This may lead to you pursuing something that offers a similar sense of safety and freedom, similar to what you got from an imaginary friend. One place that this safety can be found is online. Let me explain. The imaginary friend stage in childhood can have interesting parallels with how you currently use the internet. Although occurring at two different stages, they overlap on a psychological level. For some adults, digital spaces such as social media, dating apps, and online gaming provide a sense of safety, control, and freedom like you'd get from an imaginary friend. This transition from imaginary friends to online personas highlights a fascinating psychological continuity rather than a direct replacement. These platforms enable users to progress from having an imaginary friend to inhabiting an imaginary world where they can create idealized version of themselves through avatars and carefully curated profile pages. The safety of an online persona allows you to create a version of you that can be as close or as distant to people, having more control of the terms of the relationship. But I'm not saying that connecting with others online is a bad thing. In fact, it can display a high level of confidence to be able to interact with countless people you have never met before. What I am saying is that for some people, preferring to connect online could be an unconscious way to avoid rejection, criticism, or abandonment, which more often than not is more painful in person. There is also a risk of becoming too reliant on online relationships as a substitute for real life interactions, which could be a sign of social anxiety or low self-esteem on a deeper level, which needs to be addressed. Fostering self-awareness can lead to greater emotional regulation and being better able to understand how your anxiety impacts your decisions. But what else should you outgrow? Let's dig a little deeper. Egocentricity. Egocentricity is the tendency to think of yourself as being the center of the universe. It's the feeling that the world revolves around you and that your needs are more important than anyone else's. This type of thinking is not desirable if you're an adult, but completely acceptable if you're a toddler. The young child is psychologically wired to prioritize its own needs, often at the expense of others, in order to survive. As an adult, however, egocentricity can lead to loads of interpersonal and social problems. It may result in selfishness, narcissism, and difficulty forming meaningful relationships. The egocentric mindset of a child navigates the environment solely based on feelings and emotions, whereas adults should be able to take into consideration other factors, such as the needs of those around them and the potential long-term effects of their actions. The child's mindset, predominantly based on feelings and emotions, is naturally resistant to change because the unknown can be extremely frightening. In an unfamiliar situation or environment, the child runs to the caregiver so that together they can explore and make sense of the world around them. When a child experiences negative emotions and is comforted by their caregiver, it helps them learn how to regulate their own emotions. Eventually, they are able to self-regulate independently. If the child is not regularly soothed by the caregiver, they may find it difficult to understand or navigate their environment and lack the confidence to foster independence. Later in life, they might become overly reliant on others to manage their fears and anxieties, which can prevent them from developing these crucial skills in adulthood. Also, the inability to take responsibility for your actions may result from an egocentric mindset. You blame others or external circumstances for your mistakes. You don't take ownership for your shortcomings and become emotionally defensive when criticized. A child without a caregiver to emotionally co-regulate with heavily relies on avoidance and self-soothing to cope with emotional distress. As a result, more advanced coping strategies such as compromise, emotional maturity, and patience often remain underdeveloped. While everyone can be egocentric at times, the risk here is allowing this self-centered mindset to become your default. Making decisions solely from a subjective perspective without considering the feelings and the needs of others could have come from unconscious emotional wounds. A child lacking adequate emotional support and the absence of a nurturing environment could have led to deep-seated insecurities and fear. These unresolved emotional traumas may manifest in adulthood as a tendency to perceive even minor challenges as significant dangers, triggering defensive responses and heightened stress levels. This could have left you developing maladaptive coping mechanisms from childhood, such as avoidance or hostility. But it's never too late to start the journey of self-awareness and acknowledging your unconscious defenses that might be holding you back. Let's have a look at an even deeper perspective: dependency. Dependence is a healthy trait in the early stages of life. You want a child to run straight to a parent when they feel scared, rather than ignoring their feelings and trying to make sense of their complex emotions and environments on their own. A lack of emotional support can lead to the child developing feelings of anxiety and insecurity, and this is when you're more likely to see a child become upset and clingy, expressing that they feel unsafe. Sometimes you may see a child looking back at a parent when they're venturing out too far in the playground or just before they reach for the cookie jar. This is because the child is looking for reassurance, a sign that it's okay to keep going. They are looking for the guidance and support from their caregivers, trusting that the grown-ups' decisions and actions are in their best interests. Dependency at an early age helps a child learn to trust, love, and form bonds with people. It teaches them the duality of relationships and how one person can impact another. However, At a young age, dependency is only beneficial if you have caregivers who are reliable and emotionally available. The supportive caregiver is able to instill confidence and emotional resilience as the child grows. Eventually, the child internalizes the caregiver and is able to take responsibility for their own emotional and psychological well-being. An unsupportive caregiver can have the opposite effect, making it difficult for a child to cultivate feelings of security and safety, leading to difficulties managing their negative feelings and emotions later in life. The relationship that a child has with their caregiver can be seen as the blueprint for future relationships. When dependency persists into adulthood, you run the risk of being overly reliant on codependent relationships and friendships. This can lead to unhealthy and imbalanced dynamics where one person takes on the role of caregiver and the other becomes overly dependent. Healthy adult relationships involve interdependency, where both people are able to rely on each other for support and fulfillment without losing their sense of self or independence. It's important to learn how to maintain a healthy balance between dependency and independence in all aspects of life, including relationships. This becomes easier when you're first able to reflect on possible unconscious barriers, potentially from early childhood, to address destructive patterns. Relying heavily on external feedback and seeking validation from others, such as friends, families, or colleagues, rather than trusting your own judgment, instincts, and desires, can lead to a sense of disconnection from yourself. This can hinder your ability to develop a strong, independent, and authentic identity. But please understand, not growing up in the ideal environment doesn't mean that all hope is lost. We all need to work towards becoming emotionally self-sufficient by breaking free from unconscious childhood mechanisms. One thing that many people get wrong is thinking that they need some special way to access their unconscious mind. Watch this to not fall into that trap.